So Ukraine's future may be decided faster than we think, and it's happening in Washington and Brussels and even in Moscow. After President Trump's latest meeting with Ukraine's President Zelenskyy, new promises were made, huge dollar amounts were discussed, and talks of peace is suddenly back on the table. But here's the truth, the road ahead is insane, and some of the proposals could even reshape Europe forever. I'm going over 7 topics of what's going on and why this matters to you. He didn't really mention what these guarantees would be. We don't know if it means U.S. troops, weapon deliveries, or just political backing. He did briefly mention in an interview that he'd more than likely not be putting boots on the ground, which means that he's more than likely not going to be sending troops. But Trump did tie it back into a $90 billion U.S. weapons package, which means Ukraine would essentially buy American arms in exchange for this security pledge. So while it sounds like protection, it's also a massive business deal for U.S. defense company, and that money ultimately flows through American taxpayers and the federal budget. Also, if you want more updates like this, please do me a favor by liking this video and subscribing. It also helps a small channel out like myself, where I want to give you real unbiased updates and how this all affects you here at home. Second thing I want to touch base on is the summits and the meetings, right? Trump also suggested hosting a 3-way summit with Putin and Zelenskyy. At first glance, it sounds like the big deal maker moment that Trump has always wanted, but here's a problem. Europe doesn't trust it, and the reason why is because Russia is still bombing Ukraine daily. So when Zelenskyy met with Trump a couple days ago, Putin put another strike on Ukraine. Europe insists that they need a ceasefire first, otherwise peace talks just becomes a way of Russia to buy more time while they keep the pressure on. And they also fear that Ukraine will be cornered into giving up territory under pressure, which is something they strongly oppose. And right now, Putin hasn't even agreed to attend, which in my opinion, that kind of shows how lopsided the power dynamic still is. And I also want to mention that Trump mentioned that he will be very unhappy if a ceasefire doesn't happen after his meeting with Putin a couple days ago in Alaska, which clearly that did not happen. So that leaves the question on the table, is there a ceasefire or are they going to keep fighting? And right now, the biggest difference between Europe and Trump's approach is how that's going to be decided. Europe's stance is that stop the shooting first, then sit down at the table. They believe without a ceasefire, negotiations are meaningless because civilians keep on dying while politicians keep talking. And essentially Trump's stance, and some say that it's Putin's stance, is that the talks can happen while the fighting continues, and he believes this forces both sides to move a little bit faster, which again kind of contradicts his message about wanting a ceasefire first. But after that meeting where he had with Putin, I think he kind of realized that that's probably just never going to happen. And it seems like Putin is kind of controlling this whole outcome with little to no compromise. And to be honest, the danger I see in that is that negotiating while during an active war kind of usually favors the side of the one holding more land. And right now that's Russia, which is more than likely why Russia doesn't want a ceasefire, because they have the upper hand right now. Which leads me into number 4 is the territory question. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Trump hinted that Ukraine should be flexible on territory, meaning possible giving up parts of Donbass and other occupied regions that Russia currently holds. But the reality is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ukraine's constitution makes it illegal to surrender land. And if I read correctly, Article 2 calls the territory indivisible and inviolable, meaning that it cannot be broken up and or separated. And in Article 3, it says that borders can only be changed by a nationwide referendum. So Zelenskyy can't legally sign away the territory, even if he's pressured into doing so. It needs to be voted away. And Europe says if Russia gets to redraw Ukraine's borders by force, that it sets a dangerous precedent. Because think about it, if Russia does this, then what's stopping other powers like China from doing the same thing to Taiwan? It's like it's not something that you really want to do, right? So for Ukrainians, this isn't just political, it's personal. Imagine being told that you can have peace, but only if you hand over your home to somebody who's trying to invade your home, which is why they're calling Putin a war criminal. And I'm not agreeing or disagreeing, only because I don't want to be biased and I want to give you straight facts, but I hope that that kind of puts it onto perspective. One of the things that I want to talk about, which is number 5, is the coalition of the willing. And what it is, it's basically a temporary international group formed to accomplish a specific purpose. And in this case, it's providing security guarantees for Ukraine. So for Ukraine in early 2025, France and the UK proposed forming a coalition to support Ukraine's sovereignty. And its goal includes upholding ceasefire, deterring Russia's aggression, and planning for a peacekeeping force. So it's basically around 31 countries that have joined, including UK, France, Germany, Finland, Italy, and others. And they've had meetings virtually and in person, both chaired by leaders like the Prime Minister from UK and the President from France. So while Trump is pitching deals, Europe is quietly working on a backup plan, which again is a coalition of the willing. So think of it as a mini NATO specifically for Ukraine. Countries like Poland and the UK and France would essentially commit to defending UK without waiting for a NATO membership. This could give Ukraine real security guarantees that don't depend on Trump or even the United States alone. But it raises new questions. Will the United States support this, or will it clash with Trump's vision of a more transactional, keeping American first type of deal? Which kind of leads me into number 6, is a $90 billion question. Now, I want to break down the $90 billion weapon deal itself. Is it good business, or is it global instability waiting to happen? On the plus side, U.S. defense contractors benefit. Companies like Lockheed and Raytheon keeping production lines rolling, and that supports thousands of American jobs who are giant contractors in the U.S. for weaponry. They're basically the backbone of U.S. weapons manufacturing. So that's kind of a good thing, right? Because it creates more jobs and more money flows back into the local economies where their factories operate. So yes, it's a short-term boost to the U.S. economy, but there's a flip side. Selling weapons in the middle of an active war can actually prolong conflict, and Ukraine fights longer, Russia escalates harder, and the war drags on. So Russia also sees this as proof that America is in the war, and that can essentially trigger retaliation through like gas cutoffs, cyber attacks, and strikes against supply lines, which, if you think about it, if that happens, you can only imagine the reaction that Trump will have and how it's going to be bad for Russia. It's not something that we want to happen. It also fuels an arm race to other powers like China and Iran to speed up their own military buildups to essentially kind of keep a balance. There's also a little downside that globally many can see America as profiting from war, and that damages U.S. credibility as a peace broker, and essentially can push other countries to look for other alliances outside of the United States. So while it's great business for defense companies, it creates ripple effects that raise prices, increase risk, and can kind of destabilize the global markets, which is why I want to talk about why this matters to you. So to tie this all back to you, you might be asking, why should you even care? That $90 billion weapon deal is money tied to the U.S. defense contractors and government budget, and it impacts the economy and indirectly taxpayers. So global instability raises oil and gas prices, which means higher costs at the pump and in the grocery store. And you have to think about it. If Russia succeeds in redrawing borders by force, it signals other authoritarian countries that they can do the same thing. And that can drag America into an even bigger global crisis later down the line. This isn't just Ukraine's war, it has a ripple effect into your wallet and security and America's role in the world. What's next for Ukraine? Promises of protection and possible high-stakes summit, and a battle over land that nobody wants to give up. So on paper, it looks like it's peace getting closer, but in reality, the divisions between Trump, Europe, and Ukraine might make it further away than ever, and Trump said it himself. This has been the hardest war to stop. One he thought there was going to be a walk in the park, but the real question is this: will Ukraine walk away stronger with real guarantees, or will this be the start of pressure to trade land for peace? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification for future updates. I'll be breaking this down every step of the way so you know exactly how global politics hits your wallet here at home. Thank you guys all for watching, and until next time, love you guys all. Peace.